Welcome to another Mixed Media Monday. I'm Eric Scott, and here I am again on a Monday sharing some mixed media ideas, techniques, concepts, just to work with you. If you want to grab your stuff and work along, or if you just want to watch, it's totally up to you. So just to kind of recap, over the last few weeks, I've been working in a big journal. So for me, a lot of my mixed media stuff happens in a journal, and that's kind of how I got really into mixed media was working in my journal, and that has kind of overflowed into a lot of the other artwork that I make. But a lot of it did just start in the journal. So kind of returning back to those roots, not that I ever really abandoned them, because I've been steadily working in visual journals now for over 20 years, but just wanted to kind of share some ideas, because I think we get caught up in this notion that like I have to sit down and I have to kind of complete a work of art to make this masterpiece, all in one setting, or at least kind of like always and only work on this one thing until it's done. Where I find that I work, and I know a lot of other artists that work on lots of things at one time. And so I've been sharing how I can sit down with the journal with a single material and just focus on adding that. So it could be with the journal, it could be with separate pieces of art. And I do that all the time. I'll sit down with 6 or 7 pieces of paper, of mixed media paper, and just work with one material at a time, exploring different techniques and different kind of layouts and things like that. So that's kind of what I really am sharing kind of in this series with the visual journal, is just sitting down and focusing on just one thing at a time, because I think we get so overwhelmed with our lives, with things, that we can feel like we just don't have the time to sit down and make art. And it's like, well, but you can sit down and just work with one material. And a lot of times, you could do this while you're watching TV, or, when you have 15 minutes here and 15 minutes there. It doesn't have to be a good chunk of time. And that's why, these mixed media videos or Mixed Media Monday videos are really about, 25, 30 minutes, just to show you that you can get a lot done in a short amount of time. So let's go ahead and let's get started with some things in the journal. I've got my big book, and I've got some paintbrushes over here. And then I thought today I'd work with some of my favorite materials, or one of my favorite materials. I keep them in this little bag because I just have collected a whole bunch of pencils. These are not ordinary colored pencils. These are water-soluble pencils. And I really like the Derwent Inktense pencils. If you've tuned into this series, or if you've seen anything I've done or taken any of my classes, you know that the Inktense are pencils that I really, really like. So this spread right already, I have some Inktense on there. But so what I want to do is I want to go back, and I'm just going to kind of flip through. Let's kind of start at the beginning. And, it's like, even just looking at this is the front page. This is the first page in my journal. I haven't done much to it. So all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I want to do something to that. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my pencils, and let me see, what do I want to work with? So I want to kind of keep it in this kind of earth tone, kind of the browns and such. So I've grabbed a tan. And I think what I want to do is I want to go ahead and just make a really big square here. And I think I've used this. I think this is tan here. I'm not 100% certain. The Inktense pencils, like I said, they're kind of some of my favorites. You can use watercolor pencils or water-soluble graphite pencils. The watercolor pencils are basically like having watercolor paint in a pencil form. And the difference between the watercolor pencils and the Inktense is that basically the Inktense are water-soluble ink pencils. And I like them a little bit better because they're a bit more transparent, and I can really build up layers. So it's just kind of a preference. They're more expensive than watercolor pencils, even Derwent's watercolor pencils, but really any water soluble pencil works. And I love this because you can get these really interesting painterly effects. So I've got a whole bunch of brushes here, different sizes. This is a kind of a big area, so I'm going to use sort of a slightly big brush, maybe not a super huge brush. And then just going to spread that. And there are different techniques, but this is kind of my go-to technique, is just shading down, coloring down the pencil, and taking a paintbrush, just plain water, and brushing it over and just really spreading it around. That's kind of my go-to technique. And like I said, there are others that I use occasionally, but you know, I think as artists, you know, it's like we tend to find what really works for us, something that we really like. And just that quickly, I've got that square down. Let me go ahead and hit this with the hair dryer because I don't really want too much paint transferring over here to the inside cover. So let's hit that. Okay. Doesn't have to be super dry, but just like I've done before, I'm going to kind of flip through and you know, start to look like this spread here, this page here doesn't have a whole lot going on. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe I can do something to it. I think just really drawn to blue here. I don't know why, but I've got this color here called sea blue. And I think what I'll do is do circles. I tend to do a lot of geometric shapes at this point. And so I can kind of start to add some structure to pages. So again, just by focusing on one material, it makes it kind of less scary. It's a little bit easier just to kind of think like, oh, I'm going to add some shape, I'm going to add some color to this, and not get into that trap of like, oh, I've got to make this piece of art. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to make this amazing art, and it's like, well, let's just sit down and let's play with the materials. Let's experiment. Let's try to just put some color down. And the nice thing about doing this in the journal is like, hey, it doesn't have to be a masterpiece. Actually, even working on separate papers, I think we get so trapped in this notion of like, oh, I've got to make this art that's amazing and things. And it's like, you know what, let's not focus on making amazing art, just focus on using some materials and some techniques and seeing what happens. So I've got this is kind of like my favorite technique of shading around a shape and then painting the color out into the background. I know oftentimes we kind of think about like, oh, I'm coloring in shapes. I draw a shape and I color it in. I always kind of refer to that as like a coloring book mentality. You know, you draw a picture and then you color it in. And for years, whenever I was teaching, I would have students, you know, like we would do artwork like at the high school level, and the kids are like, are we going to color this in? And I'm like, color it in? I mean, you sound like, you know, little kids coloring in a coloring book. And it's like, there's so much that we can do. This is just a easy way to add some shapes, add some structure, add some color. And just, you know, building up layers. And this is kind of how I develop my layering technique. I mean, in a work of art, something that I hang on the wall, I might have 10 or 15 layers, even on journal pages. So I always think of every time I add something, it's a different layer. So the collage is one layer, the paint's another layer, the Inktense pencil is another layer. And if I can get this to kind of like go over here and pick up some of that pigment, you know, then now that's going on top of the collage. And, who knows, maybe I want to grab that blue pencil again, and maybe I want to do a small circle down here, or yeah, stick with circles. So the nice thing about this is that I always look at this as like creating space, creating spaces that I can come back to and do stuff into later. So I might come back later with a knife and cut one of these circles out, and then I can create a window. Or maybe I'll come back later and draw something or glue something in there. Maybe a word will go in there. So hit it with a hairdryer. And then like flipping through. So, with some of the notes, I've already gone and used some of the Inktense pencils on there. I could do more if I wanted to. I'm not sure. Let's just keep going. Well, here's a page where I haven't done any color whatsoever. So the pencil becomes a great place to do that. So just trying to think what I'll do is like maybe I'll focus up here and try to get some color in here. So I could use paint, but if I don't want to use paint, maybe I grab a pencil. Here's a poppy red. And what I'm going to do is just shade it down. So I'm going to start to color it in. And what's nice about using the water soluble pencil is that I can be pretty quick about it. And I don't have to be real neat about it. I'm trying to use more of the side of the pencil to get broader strokes, to get more even pressure. And so it's real kind of loose and things. And now I'm going to grab the big brush, and then I can just spread the water over it. I just love how the water transforms the pencil. Again, it has to be water soluble. This is not regular colored pencil. So if you tried this with regular colored pencil, it would not spread. And there's lots of different brands of water soluble pencils, and most of the major brands have a line of watercolor pencils. So even Crayola has watercolor pencils, but if you're looking for something a bit more substantial, a little bit more of professional quality, Derwent, both their Inktense and their watercolor pencils are very good. Same thing with the Prismacolor. Prismacolor has watercolor pencils. There are lots of other brands too, but those are the ones that I'm really familiar with. So I kind of done a little bit of a gradation, have darker, fades up to lighter. Let's go ahead and hit this with the dryer. Okay. I think I'll go ahead and flip the pages and just kind of think about where I might add some more. So this is a spread that I started with big circles. Excuse me. Maybe I'll come back to that later. All right, so just kind of looking at this spread, and you know, I did this line with some of the pencil. And I'm thinking, you know, I've got these rectangles over here, so kind of working with something that I already have down. Let me grab, I think, what's this? This is dusky purple. That's the, I think that's the color I used there. I want something a little different. So I think maybe a violet. So there's violet. Yeah, let's go ahead and do violet. I'm going to go ahead and sharpen this, so apologize for the noise. And just going to shade it around. I mean, so a lot of times it's kind of using the same technique. I think oftentimes as artists, especially when we're beginning artists, we're always looking like, oh, I need a new material and I need a lot of new techniques, and that it's the, you know, the newness of a technique or the newness of a material will help us in our creativity. But really, creativity is about making connections, of putting things together that perhaps there's no there's no reason why they should go together. So just, I mean, my reason for saying, oh, I want to do purple here was I saw the rectangles and I just said, let's put purple around them. And I can be, you know, I can, there might be more of a reason like, oh, it's going to make the rectangles stand out more. It's going to help me kind of bring some focus to that. But, you know, really, it's just, let me get some color down. Let me build up some of these things and see what happens. All right. I think I'll use the slightly smaller brush. And I scrub that pigment, that color out until it just sort of disappears. And it's okay if it's not smooth and if it looks kind of scratchy. At least I think it's okay that way. Some people get a little bit like, oh well, it's got to be smooth and I've got to blend it really well. And but I like building up that kind of loose texture of brush strokes. I love how that color spreads. And you really have to put down a lot of pigment. Sometimes folks they won't press hard with the pencil and they don't shade very hard. With a really good quality pencil, the core, what we call the pencil lead, even though there's no lead in it, but that core, the color of the pencil is very soft. And so it's easy to press hard and get a lot of pigment down. And that's how I can get these really rich, bright, brilliant colors from the pencil. If you just put down a couple little strokes and you don't press very hard, it's not going to be very bright. It's not going to be very vivid. And then sometimes folks get a little frustrated because they're like, how do I get the color to be really intense? And you really have to put a lot of it down. Okay, so looking at this spread, you know, lots of dark, brilliant purple over here, not so much over here. So I might start thinking about like, oh, well, What if I want to bring some of that purple? Go grab that and bring some of that over here. So I think we'll stick with the rectangles or squares. So again, we don't need copious amounts of time. Sometimes all we need is 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there. And if we have a space where we can sit down and quickly open up a journal or pull out some paper or pull out some things that we've been working on, then we can really quickly get going, get to work on stuff. And these little actions, they're not groundbreaking, it's not earth shattering, it's not these amazing new materials and amazing techniques, but it's just about putting in the time and maybe focusing just on a single material and maybe a single technique. All right, so the dark purple kind of helps balance that out. I'm going to add more to this later, but let's go ahead and dry this with the hair dryer. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So oftentimes whenever I'm working, I'm trying to kind of use similar colors, what we might call analogous colors. So, whether on this one, I use some orange and some red previously, use some paint as well. I don't know if I'll add anything to this today. Okay, so here's a spread that I've got some squares going, so lots of straight lines. So maybe I need to have something a little different. Let's go ahead and pull out kind of feeling green. So here's a teal green. Let me sharpen this. So like when I look at this, I've got some collage. So I use some paint. I've used, actually, this is the teal green here, some of these little dashes. So maybe I'll do some more of that. And then I've got some tracing paper with lines drawn on it that I've collaged in. Let's go ahead, since I have these little green dashes, I'm gonna go ahead and do that and continue since there's not a whole lot. And I think I probably was doing these marks as part of one of my online workshops, mindful mark making. And it's just this notion of kind of doing repetitive lines and repetitive marks. And just to kind of show you that, sometimes you'll do something, you're like, oh, I like that, or maybe I need to do more. And you can always come back later and do more of that. And actually thinking about like, I glued this card in afterwards, and maybe I want to come back in and put some of those marks right on top, kind of help push it in even further. And so I'm trying to press pretty hard because I'm just doing little marks, and I want to have some of that pigment to really spread a little bit, because over here you can kind of see how the marks have faded, but the pigment is spread a little bit. Since I'm not shading in big areas or coloring in, I just want to make sure that I'm pressing hard. And I kind of go right over top of the paper where this monster drawing is. Let's do some marks over here. I think I'm going to try to keep them out of this square. Maybe this square becomes, like I said before, that space for something else to happen. Now I have a little window cut here, and but this is actually this square is actually cut from here, and I just glued it on. So I'm gonna go ahead and do some of those marks on there. So besides just putting down, shading down color to add color, and or kind of creating some shapes with the pencil, I can create some textures. So again, just painting some plain water. And there's a little bit of pigment that spreads. It's not overwhelming. It's just kind of a little bit. But as soon as that water hits the Inktense pencil, it becomes kind of, like I said, transforms it, makes it brighter, really kind of just activates it. Just always making sure that I'm keeping a lot of water in my brush whenever I'm doing this. Okay. Just trying to think like, oh, do I really need to dry it? I don't think I do. So that window lines up there. Here I did tracing circles, created a texture there. Yeah, done more shapes with them. So here might be a good place to kind of help build up some different, some more layers. So I've done some watercolor in the background, some ink drawings, and then did some of the blue water-soluble pencil, some collage, and even some ink drawing on top. So I'm trying to think like, what do I want to do? Maybe, this is green. We've got blue. I'm going to do something that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense to do. I'm going to grab a pencil. Here's a nice bright yellow. Let me sharpen it. So most of the time, whenever I'm working with the water-soluble pencils, I will work from light to dark. And so I'll use, if I'm using yellow, usually that's like the first color that I use down. But it could be really interesting to go back with that light color. It's barely showing up in the video. I'm just doing some horizontal lines. Maybe they'll show up a little bit better over here. I'll do it. Yeah, it's barely showing up. So that yellow is such a light, bright color. When I paint over it, it'll probably show up a little bit better. So of course, yellow and the blue are going to kind of create some greens. And because of the transparent nature of the pencil, of the color, that's what I like about building up these layers. So I'm just doing some lines. And the lines are going to fade a lot. But I'm pressing hard, trying to put down a lot of the pigment. Maybe I'll do some lines through here. And then take the big brush, get a lot of water. Just spreading a lot of that yellow. That yellow just sort of starts to pop out a little bit now. So I use the pencil just to add, some broad color to pages, to do some shapes, some lines, some patterns. Just really starts to add a lot of texture, structure, layers to pages. Don't think this needs to be dried before I change pages. Now, because this is wet here, I probably wouldn't want to do anything on this side of the paper because this paper is damp. So I can just kind of flip through it. Here I did a bunch of spirals that kind of fade in the background. Just kind of looking at this, I've got this strip of map here. I'm just like, oh, what would happen if I did something along that line? So maybe pick out a good green. Here's one, beach green, as in beach, as in the tree. I don't know if that's the same green I used over here or not. I'm just kind of putting that dark value in there. It's going to create this dark line and create this more of a separation. I mean, the map creates that line, but it sort of fades. It's not super vivid. There's not a lot of contrast between the map and the color beside, except for, there's some dark lines on it, but this darker green, creates more of a noticeable line. And whenever I put paint on or water on it, it's going to change it. Actually, you know what I thought? Well, why don't I put some paint on it? So another technique is using paint. So I'm going to use this yellowish or greenish yellow is what it is. It looks, well, in real life, it looks kind of green, but it really paints down as a yellow, but not quite as, well, actually it might be that same yellow. But then I'm just gonna let it mix in with that green. So what I like to do is I like to kind of rinse the brush out before I get more of that paint. And that way I'm not contaminating the paint with that darker green pigment. So I don't need to use just plain water. Basically anything that has water in it, like paint or even a marker, can really help spread that paint. Let's go ahead and keep now I'm just kind of using the straight paint, not allowing it to mix so much with the water soluble pencil. Okay. I think with this one, I am gonna dry it. So you can see how that green really kind of creates that line, that separation, helps divide the spread into like two parts, two uneven parts, which makes it kind of interesting. And then the stripes help tie it together. The color scheme, the yellows and greens help tie it together. Yeah, so I think that's a good stopping point for today. So I hope that you're starting to see how easy it is to kind of build up layers, and sit down with just one material, maybe even one or two techniques using that material, and add to multiple things, and not get so caught up in trying to make an awesome piece of art or a masterpiece, or even kind of taking that word art out of the equation and just sitting down and giving yourself that permission to play and experiment with the material to see what happens. And very quickly you start to build up, you start to really cover a lot, do a lot, and it's just one simple material, and I can start to add and build, and just by doing this again and again, sitting down 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there, 20 minutes there. If you have hours and hours to spend, that's great. And you can really, really focus on lots of different materials and techniques and ideas. But, especially when you're pressed for time, just sitting down with a single material, spending some time with it, working with it on multiple things, and not getting attached to that notion like I have to make this masterpiece. And it's more about I need to sit down and get some color down. I need to put some shapes down. I need to do some patterns. So anyway, just another approach, another idea for working in a journal or working on your art using some mixed media ideas. So I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for joining me again. And I'll be back next week with some more ideas. So thank you so much. And as always, happy creating.